The silence in the briefing room was deafening. 23 hardened soldiers sat frozen as their commanding officer's words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. The young woman they had dismissed, ridiculed, and written off as too weak for combat had just been revealed as the most lethal sniper in their entire division. Her kill count wasn't just impressive, it was legendary. But this wasn't just about numbers on a report. This was about Sarah Martinez, the quiet recruit who had endured months of harassment, doubt, and outright sabotage from her fellow soldiers. They had called her everything from princess to liability, convinced that she would crack under pressure and get someone killed. What they didn't know was that she had already saved more lives than any of them could imagine. As Colonel Harrison continued reading from the classified file, revealing mission after mission where Sarah's precision had turned the tide of battle, the room remained silent. These weren't stories of luck or chance. They were accounts of calculated, life-saving shots taken under impossible conditions. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the prejudice that had nearly destroyed one of the military's most valuable assets. The real story wasn't just about a woman proving herself in a man's world. It was about how assumptions, bias, and pride had almost cost the military one of its greatest weapons. And, as the colonel's voice filled the room with account after account of Sarah's heroic actions, every person present began to realize they had been part of something much darker than they understood. This is the story of how they said she couldn't handle combat, and how wrong they were about everything. Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport truck at Forward Operating Base Thunderbolt, her boots hitting the dusty ground of Afghanistan with a thud that seemed to echo her racing heartbeat. The desert sun blazed overhead, and the air was thick with dust and diesel fumes. Around her, soldiers moved with purpose, their faces weathered by months of combat experience. She adjusted her pack and tried to project confidence, but the whispers had already started. "Great, another desk jockey," muttered Sergeant Rick Powell, a veteran with 3 tours under his belt. His voice carried just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Hope she can at least handle a radio without crying." Private First Class Mike Torres snickered from nearby. $20, says she's back home in a month. These college types never last when the real shooting starts. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her jaw tightened slightly. She had graduated top of her class in marksmanship at Fort Benning, earned expert ratings on every weapon system she had trained on, and scored higher on her combat readiness evaluations than 70% of her male counterparts. None of that seemed to matter here. The base was a sprawling complex of reinforced structures and blast walls, surrounded by razor wire and watchtowers. Helicopters thundered overhead while armored vehicles rumbled past, kicking up clouds of dust. This was her new home, and these men would be her brothers in arms, if they ever accepted her. Captain James Sullivan, the company commander, emerged from a nearby building and approached the new arrivals. He was a lean man with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When his gaze fell on Sarah, she saw a flicker of something. Doubt, maybe, or resignation. "Martinez," he called out, checking his roster. "Welcome to Charlie Company. You'll be assigned to 2nd Platoon under Lieutenant Watson. He'll get you squared away." Lieutenant Michael Watson appeared moments later, a young officer trying to prove himself just like everyone else. He looked Sarah up and down with obvious skepticism. "So you're our new addition," he said, his tone suggesting she was more of a burden than an asset. "I hope you're ready for this, because we don't have time for hand-holding." "I'm ready, sir," Sarah replied crisply, maintaining military bearing despite the obvious hostility. Watson led her through the base, pointing out key locations while other soldiers stopped their activities to stare. The mess hall, the armory, the medical bay, the communications center, each stop brought more whispered comments and questioning looks. By the time they reached the barracks, Sarah felt like she was under a microscope. The sleeping quarters were basic but functional, with rows of cots and footlockers. Sarah was assigned a bunk near the back, away from the others. As she unpacked her gear, she could feel eyes on her from across the room. "Hey, Martinez," called out Specialist Danny Torres, Mike's older brother. "You ever fired a rifle at anything that shoots back?" "I've completed all required combat training," Sarah responded without looking up from her footlocker. "Training," Danny laughed. "That's not the same as combat, sweetheart. When bullets start flying, instincts take over. And women just don't have the right instincts for killing." Sarah finally turned to face him. "With respect, Specialist, you don't know what instincts I have." The exchange drew more attention. Soldiers began gathering around, sensing confrontation. Sergeant Powell stepped forward, clearly establishing himself as the unofficial spokesperson for the group. "Look, Martinez," he said in a voice that was supposed to sound reasonable. "Nothing personal, but this isn't some equality experiment. People's lives are on the line out there. When we're in a firefight, we need to know everyone can pull their weight." "I can pull my weight," Sarah said firmly. "Can you?" Powell's voice hardened. "Can you carry a wounded soldier twice your size back to safety? Can you kick in a door and clear a room? Can you watch a friend die and still keep fighting?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Sarah wanted to respond, to defend herself, but she realized that anything she said would only fuel their skepticism. These men had made up their minds about her before she had even arrived. "I guess we'll find out," she said quietly, then returned to organizing her gear. The group gradually dispersed, but Sarah could feel the weight of their judgment settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had expected some resistance, but the level of hostility surprised her. These weren't just professional concerns. They felt personal, as if her very presence was an insult to their masculinity. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, picking at her MRE while conversations flowed around her. Stories of recent missions, complaints about the heat, discussions of home, none of it included her. She was an outsider in every sense of the word. Corporal Lisa Chun, one of only 3 other women on the base, sat down across from her. Lisa worked in intelligence and had been there for 8 months. "It gets easier," Lisa said quietly, keeping her voice low. "Eventually they'll find something else to focus on." "How long did it take for you?" Sarah asked. Lisa shrugged. "I'm still waiting. But then, again, I'm not infantry. You're threatening their club in a way I never could." "I'm not threatening anyone," Sarah protested. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job is their identity," Lisa explained. "They see themselves as protectors, warriors, the tip of the spear. When a woman shows up wanting to do the same job, it challenges everything they think they know about themselves." Sarah nodded slowly, beginning to understand the deeper dynamics at play. This wasn't just about her qualifications or abilities. It was about their perception of what it meant to be a soldier. The next morning brought Sarah's first mission briefing. 2nd Platoon was scheduled for a routine patrol through a nearby village, gathering intelligence and maintaining a visible presence. As the soldiers gathered around a large map, Lieutenant Watson outlined their route and objectives. "Martinez, you'll be with Squad 2, Watson announced. "Stay close to Sergeant Powell and do exactly what he tells you. No heroics, no initiative, just follow orders." Sarah bit back her response. She had been trained as a marksman, specifically to provide overwatch and precision fire support. Relegating her to a babysitting role made no tactical sense, but arguing would only reinforce their perception of her as difficult. Sergeant Powell approached her after the briefing. "Listen up, rookie," he said, his voice low and serious. "Out there, you follow my lead. You don't take any shots unless I specifically tell you to. You don't move unless I tell you to move. And if things go bad, you stay out of the way and let the real soldiers handle it." "Understood, Sergeant," Sarah replied, though every word felt like a small defeat. The patrol prepared to leave just after sunrise. Sarah checked her M4 carbine one final time, ensuring her scope was properly zeroed and her ammunition was secure. Despite the hostility from her squad mates, she felt ready. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of doing since she was a child watching her grandfather's war stories. As the convoy of armored vehicles rolled through the gates of FOB Thunderbolt, Sarah caught sight of herself in the side mirror. Behind her helmet and protective gear, she looked like any other soldier. But she knew that image was deceptive. To everyone around her, she was still just a liability waiting to happen. The village of Katamet was a collection of mud brick buildings and narrow streets that had seen better days. Children peeked out from doorways as the patrol moved through, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution. The soldiers maintained tactical spacing, weapons ready but not threatening. Sarah found herself impressed by the professionalism of her squad mates, despite their personal opinions of her. They moved with practiced precision, communicating through hand signals and maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings. Whatever they thought of her as a person, they were clearly experienced soldiers. The patrol proceeded without incident for the first 2 hours. They spoke with village elders, checked suspicious areas, and documented anything unusual. Sarah remained in the background, following Powell's orders to observe and stay quiet. Then, the call came over the radio that would change everything. "All units, we have reports of enemy movement in Sector 7. Possible IED placement in progress." Bravo Company is requesting immediate support. Lieutenant Watson's voice crackled through their headsets. Second Squad, move to Overwatch position on the North Ridge. Third Squad, establish a blocking position on the East Road. First Squad, you're with me on the approach. As the squads began to move, Sarah realized this was her first real test. Everything she had trained for, everything she believed about herself, was about to be put to the ultimate test. And, based on the looks her squad mates were giving her, they were all expecting her to fail. The ridge overlooking Sector 7 was rocky and exposed, offering excellent visibility, but little cover. Sarah followed Sergeant Powell and the rest of Second Squad as they scrambled up the steep incline, their equipment clanking softly with each movement. Below them, the landscape stretched out in brown and tan waves, dotted with compounds and irrigation ditches that could hide an army of insurgents. Powell positioned his squad along the ridge line, spacing them 15 meters apart. Sarah found herself at the far right end, somewhat isolated from the others. She set up her rifle on its bipod and began scanning the area through her scope, looking for any signs of enemy activity. Martinez, remember what I told you. Powell's voice came through her earpiece. You're here to observe and report. Leave the shooting to us. Sarah keyed her radio once to acknowledge, though frustration gnawed at her. She had been trained specifically for this type of mission, providing precise, long-range fire support. Her rifle was equipped with a high-powered scope and match-grade ammunition, making her the most accurate shooter in the squad. But, instead of utilizing her skills, they were treating her like a burden. Through her scope, Sarah began methodically scanning the target area. Training had taught her to look for specific indicators. Unusual movement patterns, reflections from metal or glass, disturbed earth that might indicate buried explosives, and people where they shouldn't be. 10 minutes into their overwatch, she spotted something. Sergeant Powell, she called quietly over the radio. I have movement in the compound at grid reference 4-7-8-5. 2 individuals on the rooftop, one appears to have a radio. Powell swung his binoculars toward the location. I don't see anything, Martinez. Are you sure? Sarah adjusted her scope and looked again. The figures were partially concealed behind a low wall, but she could clearly see them moving. Confirmed, Sergeant. 2 males, military age, northeast corner of the compound. One has what looks like a handheld radio. Negative, Powell replied curtly. I'm not seeing any movement there. Stay focused on your assigned sector. Sarah bit her tongue but continued watching the compound. Something felt wrong about the dismissive response, but she followed orders and expanded her search area. As she panned her scope across the village below, more details began to emerge. There were people moving through the streets, but their patterns seemed off. Instead of the normal flow of daily life, they appeared to be positioning themselves at key intersections and choke points. Sarah counted at least 6 individuals who seemed to be carrying more than civilian necessities. Sergeant, I'm seeing coordinated movement throughout the village, she reported. Multiple individuals moving to what appeared to be strategic positions. Powell's response was sharp. Martinez, I told you to observe your assigned sector. Stop trying to run the entire operation. Before Sarah could respond, the radio crackled with urgent traffic from Lieutenant Watson's position. Overwatch, we need eyes on the approach road from the south. Possible vehicle moving toward our position. Specialist Torres, positioned in the center of the ridge line, quickly shifted his position. I've got a white pickup truck, about 800 meters out, moving fast toward the village. Any weapons visible? Watson asked. Negative on weapons, but the truck bed is covered with a tarp. Sarah had swung her scope toward the vehicle as soon as Torres reported it. At her magnification level, she could see details that the others might miss. The truck was indeed moving fast, and there were at least 3 men in the cab. But, more importantly, she could see the outline of what appeared to be a heavy weapon under the tarp. Lieutenant Watson, this is Martinez, she called over the radio, breaking protocol by communicating directly with the platoon leader. The vehicle has what appears to be a crew-served weapon in the bed. I can make out part of the mount structure and what might be a machine gun barrel. Sergeant Powell's voice cut across the channel immediately. Martinez, maintain radio discipline. You report to me, not directly to command. But Lieutenant Watson had heard enough. All units, treat the approaching vehicle as hostile. Second Squad, can you engage from your position? This was exactly what Sarah had trained for. A moving target at long range, requiring precise calculation of windage, elevation, and lead time. She had practiced similar shots hundreds of times, and knew she could stop the vehicle before it reached the village. I have a clear shot on the vehicle, Sarah reported to Powell. Distance approximately 750 meters, minimal wind, clear line of sight. Powell hesitated for a moment, and Sarah could hear the internal conflict in his voice when he finally responded. Negative, Martinez. Torres, take the shot. Torres adjusted his position and aimed down his scope. Sarah watched through her own optics as he fired 3 quick rounds. The bullets impacted the ground well short of the target, sending up small puffs of dust. The truck continued its approach, now less than 600 meters from the village. Missed, Torres reported, working his bolt and preparing for another shot. Let me take it, Sarah said urgently. I have a better angle and the range dialed in. Negative, Powell replied firmly. Torres, adjust your aim and fire again. Sarah watched in growing frustration as Torres fired another burst, this time hitting behind the vehicle. The truck swerved slightly but continued forward. At 500 meters, it would be in the village within seconds, and if her assessment of the weapon in the truck bed was correct, her squad mates below would be in serious danger. She made a decision that would define her entire military career. Ignoring direct orders, Sarah settled her crosshairs on the truck's engine block, adjusted for distance and the vehicle's speed, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through her scope, she watched the heavy bullet strike exactly where she had aimed. Steam immediately began pouring from under the hood, and the truck coasted to a stop, its engine destroyed. The radio exploded with chatter as the truck's occupants bailed out, confirming Sarah's assessment. 3 armed men emerged, one immediately setting up what was clearly a heavy machine gun, while the others took defensive positions. Good shot, whoever made it. Lieutenant Watson's voice came over the radio. Target is neutralized, and we have confirmed hostiles setting up a weapons position. Powell's voice was ice cold when he keyed his radio. Martinez, you directly disobeyed orders. Sergeant, with respect, the vehicle posed an immediate threat to our personnel below. I had the shot, and I took it. That wasn't your call to make. Before Powell could continue the argument, the situation escalated dramatically. The radio crackled with reports from multiple positions as the village erupted in coordinated gunfire. Sarah's earlier observations had been correct. They were facing an organized ambush. Taking fire from multiple positions, reported 1st Squad. We need immediate support. 3rd Squad is pinned down by sniper fire from the eastern buildings, came another report. From her position on the ridge, Sarah could see the entire battlefield laid out below her. Her elevated position and high-powered scope gave her a unique perspective on the developing battle. She could see muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops that the squads below couldn't identify, and her training kicked in automatically. I have eyes on hostile positions, she reported to Powell. Multiple targets presenting themselves throughout the village. Maintain position and observe only, Powell ordered. Do not engage without direct orders. But Sarah could see that waiting for orders was going to get people killed. A sniper in a minaret had a clear shot at 3rd Squad's position, and they didn't even know he was there. The machine gun team from the truck had moved to a compound wall and was preparing to engage 1st Squad from their flank. Sergeant, 3rd Squad is about to be engaged by a sniper in the minaret, approximately 400 meters southeast of their position. Request permission to engage. Powell was busy coordinating with Lieutenant Watson and didn't immediately respond. Through her scope, Sarah watched the distant sniper settle into position and begin to aim at her fellow soldiers below. She didn't wait for permission. The shot was slightly uphill with a mild crosswind from the left. Sarah adjusted her aim point accordingly and fired. The hostile sniper jerked and disappeared from view, his weapon clattering down the outside of the minaret. Hostile sniper eliminated. She reported matter-of-factly, already shifting her aim to the machine gun position. Martinez. Powell's voice was furious. What part of do not engage did you not understand? But other voices were beginning to cut through Powell's anger. Outstanding shot. Whoever took out that sniper, came 3rd Squad's relieved voice. He had us dead to rights. 2nd Squad, we need you to identify and engage the machine gun position that's flanking 1st Squad, Lieutenant Watson ordered. Sarah had already identified the position and was lining up her shot. Machine gun position identified, 600 meters southwest, behind the compound wall with the blue gate. The machine gun crew was partially concealed, but Sarah could see enough of the gunner to make the shot count. She adjusted for the increased distance and fired. The heavy bullet punched through the wall, and the hostile fire immediately stopped. Machine gun position silenced, she reported. Excellent shooting, second squad. Watson's voice carried clear relief. Continue to provide overwatch and identify targets of opportunity. But Powell's anger was palpable through the radio. All second squad positions, hold fire unless specifically ordered. Martinez, when we get back to base, you and I are going to have a serious conversation. The battle continued for another hour, with sporadic gunfire from various positions throughout the village. Sarah identified and engaged 6 more hostile positions, each shot precisely placed and immediately effective. Her accuracy was remarkable, and with each successful engagement, her squad mates' attitudes began to shift slightly. Damn, she heard Torres mutter during a lull in the fighting. Girl can shoot. Lucky shots, Powell responded, but his conviction seemed less certain than before. When the all-clear finally came and the patrol began its movement back to base, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. She had proven herself in combat, potentially saving lives with her marksmanship. But she had also directly disobeyed orders, and she knew there would be consequences. During the ride back to FOB Thunderbolt, the atmosphere in the vehicle was tense. Powell sat across from her with his arms crossed, clearly furious about her insubordination. But she also caught some of the other soldiers glancing at her with something that might have been respect. 8 confirmed hits at ranges between 400 and 700 meters, she heard Specialist Torres quietly tell his brother. Every single shot was right where it needed to be. Sarah stared out the armored window at the passing landscape and wondered if her actions had been worth the trouble they would certainly cause. She had joined the military to serve her country and protect her fellow soldiers, and today she had done exactly that. But she had also learned that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. As the convoy rolled through the gates of FOB Thunderbolt, Sarah knew her real fight was just beginning. The enemy in the village had been defeated, but the battle for acceptance among her own people was far from over. Sarah sat outside Captain Sullivan's office, still wearing her dusty combat gear from the morning's patrol. The plastic chair felt uncomfortably warm against her back, and she could hear heated voices from behind the closed door. Sergeant Powell had been in there for 15 minutes, and based on the tone of the conversation, he wasn't giving her a positive recommendation. The door finally opened, and Powell emerged with his face flushed red with anger. He glanced at Sarah as he passed, his expression making it clear that he felt vindicated by whatever conversation had just taken place. Martinez, Captain Sullivan called from inside his office. Get in here. Sarah stood and walked into the small, air-conditioned office that served as the company command post. Sullivan was a career officer with 20 years of experience, and his weathered face showed the stress of commanding soldiers in a combat zone. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. So, Sullivan began, leaning back in his chair. Your first day on patrol, and you decide to ignore direct orders from your squad leader. Want to explain that to me? Sarah straightened in her chair. Sir, I engaged targets that posed immediate threats to our personnel. In each case, I had clear shots, and the tactical situation required immediate action. The tactical situation, Sullivan repeated, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. Sergeant Powell tells me he specifically ordered you not to engage without permission. He says you fired at least 8 shots without authorization. Yes, sir, that's correct. But those shots neutralized hostile positions that were engaging our people. 3rd Squad confirmed they were about to be engaged by the sniper I eliminated. Sullivan nodded slowly, consulting a folder on his desk. I've read Lieutenant Watson's after-action report. He mentions exceptional marksmanship from 2nd Squad's Overwatch position. 8 confirmed kills at extended ranges, all precisely placed shots that immediately neutralized threats. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Sir, I was trained as a designated marksman. Long-range precision fire is exactly what I'm supposed to provide. That's true, Sullivan agreed. But you're also supposed to follow orders and maintain unit cohesion. Sergeant Powell has been in combat for 3 tours. When he gives you an order, there's usually a good reason for it. With respect, sir, sometimes the situation on the ground changes faster than orders can be updated. I had information that other positions didn't have, and I used it to protect our people. Sullivan stood up and walked to a large map of the area of operations that covered one wall of his office. Martinez, let me be direct with you. Your shooting today was exceptional. Some of the best marksmanship I've seen in 20 years. But military operations aren't just about individual performance. They're about teams working together. I understand that, sir. But Sullivan held up a hand. Let me finish. Your actions today saved lives. Lieutenant Watson estimates that the sniper you eliminated would have killed or wounded at least 2 soldiers in 3rd Squad. The machine gun position you neutralized was about to enfilade 1st Squad's position. From a tactical standpoint, you made the right calls. Sarah felt confused by the mixed message. Then, what's the problem, sir? The problem is that half of your squad thinks you're a loose cannon who can't follow orders, and the other half thinks Sergeant Powell was too rigid in his command decisions. Either way, unit cohesion is compromised. Sullivan returned to his desk and sat down heavily. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. Do you think you know better than your squad leader? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, sir. Sergeant Powell has far more experience than I do. But, in that specific situation, my training and position gave me information he didn't have. I tried to communicate what I was seeing, but my reports were dismissed. Powell says you were trying to run the entire operation instead of focusing on your assigned sector. Sir, my assigned sector was clear. When I expanded my observation area and identified the coordinated movement patterns, I was trying to provide intelligence that could help the entire operation. That's what a designated marksman is supposed to do. Sullivan leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. Martinez, you're putting me in a difficult position. I need soldiers who can follow orders, but I also need soldiers who can think independently when the situation requires it. The question is whether you can find the right balance. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the door. Come in, Sullivan called. Lieutenant Watson entered, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Sorry to interrupt, sir, but I thought you should see this. Watson handed Sullivan a printed message. It's from Colonel Harrison. He wants a detailed report on today's engagement, specifically requesting information about the marksman who provided overwatch. Sullivan scanned the message, his eyebrows rising slightly. Interesting timing. Lieutenant, what's your assessment of Specialist Martinez's performance today? Watson glanced at Sarah, then back at his commander. Sir, from a tactical standpoint, her performance was outstanding. Every shot she fired eliminated a direct threat to our personnel. Her observation and reporting were accurate and timely. If I had any criticism, it would be that she should have been more assertive in communicating what she was seeing. More assertive? Sullivan asked. Yes, sir. She identified hostile movement patterns before the engagement began, but when her reports were questioned, she backed down instead of insisting on their importance. If she had been more forceful in her initial assessments, we might have avoided the ambush entirely. Sarah stared at Watson in surprise. This was not the conversation she had expected. Sullivan set the message aside and looked at both officers. Lieutenant, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report on today's engagement. Include detailed information about Specialist Martinez's actions, including specific ranges, conditions, and tactical impact of each shot. Have it on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. Yes, sir, Watson replied, then left the office. Sullivan turned back to Sarah. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to continue with 2nd Platoon, but I'm making some changes to how you're utilized. Instead of being attached to a rifle squad, you're going to operate as a designated marksman with more autonomy in target selection. Sir, Sergeant Powell isn't wrong about the importance of following orders, but he also isn't maximizing your capabilities. Lieutenant Watson will work with you to develop standard operating procedures for when you can engage targets without specific authorization. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with uncertainty. What about Sergeant Powell, sir? He's not going to be happy about this. Sullivan's expression hardened slightly. Sergeant Powell is an excellent soldier, but he needs to learn to adapt to new capabilities within his unit. That's my problem to solve, not yours. Yes, sir. However, Sullivan continued, his tone becoming more serious, this arrangement depends entirely on your ability to make sound tactical decisions. If you ever take an unauthorized shot that results in unnecessary casualties or compromises a mission, you'll be on the first transport back to the States. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now get cleaned up and get some rest. I have a feeling you're going to be very busy in the coming weeks. Sarah left Captain Sullivan's office feeling cautiously optimistic, but she knew the real test would be how her squad mates reacted to the changes. As she walked across the base toward the barracks, she could see groups of soldiers talking in hushed tones. Word of the day's engagement had spread quickly, and she could feel eyes following her movement. In the barracks, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Sergeant Powell was sitting on his bunk, methodically cleaning his rifle with sharp, angry movements. The other members of 2nd Squad were scattered around the room, and conversation stopped abruptly when Sarah entered. Well, Powell said without looking up from his weapon. If it isn't our new hero. I heard Captain Sullivan had some interesting things to say about your performance today. Sarah walked to her footlocker and began removing her gear. I'm not trying to be a hero, Sergeant. I'm just trying to do my job. Your job, Powell repeated, finally, looking up at her. Let me tell you something about your job, Martinez. Your job is to follow orders. Your job is to be part of a team. Your job is not to decide for yourself when to shoot and when not to shoot. Specialist Torres spoke up from across the room. Come on, Sarge. She saved our asses out there. Third squad said that sniper had them dead to rights. Powell's glare shifted to Torres. That's not the point, Torres. Today she got lucky. But what happens next time when her cowboy tactics get someone killed? They weren't cowboy tactics, Sarah said quietly, continuing to organize her equipment. Every shot I took was calculated and necessary. Calculated? Powell laughed bitterly. You've been in country for exactly 1 day, Martinez. What could you possibly know about calculating anything in this environment? Private First Class Johnson, who had been silent during most of these exchanges, finally spoke up. Actually, Sarge, I was watching through my scope when she took out that machine gun position. It was about a 600-meter shot through a gap in a wall that couldn't have been more than 8 inches wide. That wasn't luck. Powell stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. I don't want to hear it, Johnson. All of you are missing the point. This isn't about marksmanship. It's about discipline and unit cohesion. No, said a quiet voice from the entrance to the barracks. Everyone turned to see Corporal David Chun, Lisa's husband, who worked as a forward observer. It's about ego. Powell whirled toward Chun. What did you say? Chun walked into the barracks and set down his gear. I said it's about ego, Sergeant. I was with First Squad today, and I watched that machine gun crew setting up to hit us from the flank. We didn't even know they were there until Martinez took them out. She saved lives today, and instead of acknowledging that, you're more worried about the fact that a woman made you look bad. The barracks fell silent. Powell's face was now bright red, and Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. Chun, you're out of line, Powell said through gritted teeth. Am I? Chun replied calmly. Because from where I was sitting today, it looked like Martinez was the only one doing her job properly. She identified threats, communicated them up the chain, and when those communications were ignored, she took action to protect her fellow soldiers. She disobeyed direct orders. She prevented a massacre, Chun shot back. And if you can't see the difference, maybe you shouldn't be leading soldiers in combat. Powell took a step toward Chun, but Torres and Johnson quickly moved between them. The situation was escalating rapidly toward physical confrontation. Enough! Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. This stops right now. She stood up and faced Powell directly. Sergeant, I respect your experience and your position. I never intended to undermine your authority or make you look bad. My only goal today was to protect our people and complete the mission successfully. Powell stared at her for a long moment before responding. And what about next time, Martinez? What happens when your independent thinking gets someone killed? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then, I'll take full responsibility for that decision. But I won't apologize for keeping our people alive today. The standoff continued for several more seconds before Powell finally turned away. We'll see how long that confidence lasts, he muttered, then left the barracks. As the door slammed behind him, the remaining soldiers began to relax slightly. Chun nodded approvingly at Sarah before heading to his own bunk, while Torres and Johnson exchanged meaningful glances. For what it's worth, Torres said quietly, I'm glad you were up there watching our backs today. Sarah nodded gratefully, but she knew this was far from over. She had won a tactical victory today, but the larger battle for acceptance was just beginning. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if Powell might be right about the dangers of independent thinking in a military environment. Only time would tell if her approach would save lives or cost them. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first combat engagement, and the dynamics within 2nd Platoon had settled into an uneasy tension. Captain Sullivan had implemented her new role as designated marksman, giving her more operational autonomy while keeping her technically under Sergeant Powell's command. The arrangement satisfied no one completely, but it had proven effective in subsequent missions. Sarah had participated in 6 more combat operations, each one adding to her growing reputation as an exceptional marksman. Word of her abilities had spread beyond Charlie Company, and requests for 2nd Platoon's Overwatch support had increased significantly. But with recognition came new pressures, and challenges that no one had anticipated. The morning briefing was held in the company command post, a reinforced building that served as the nerve center for their area of operations. Major Patricia Wells, the battalion operations officer, had arrived from division headquarters to personally oversee a complex multi-unit operation scheduled for the following day. "Gentlemen," Major Wells began, then paused as she noticed Sarah among the assembled soldiers. "And lady, tomorrow's operation is going to be our most ambitious yet. Intelligence indicates that a high-value target has taken refuge in a compound approximately 12 kilometers northeast of our position." She gestured to a detailed map displayed on the wall. "The target is Qasim al-Rashid, a bomb-maker responsible for at least 15 IED attacks in this sector. He's been operating with impunity because his compound is situated in extremely difficult terrain that makes conventional assault nearly impossible." Captain Sullivan leaned forward. "What kind of terrain are we looking at, Major?" "The compound sits on a plateau surrounded by steep ravines. There's only one practical approach route, which is heavily fortified and overlooks the entire valley. Any ground assault would face withering fire from elevated positions." Lieutenant Watson studied the map carefully. "How do we neutralize the elevated positions?" Major Wells smiled grimly. "That's where your designated marksman comes in. According to the reports I've been reading, Specialist Martinez has demonstrated exceptional long-range capabilities. We need someone who can engage multiple targets at extended ranges while remaining concealed." All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt the familiar mixture of pride and pressure that came with these high-stakes assignments. "What kind of ranges are we talking about, Major?" "The longest shots will be approximately 900 to 1,000 meters, under challenging conditions with significant elevation changes and variable wind patterns." Sarah nodded slowly. These were at the extreme edge of her effective range, but well within her capabilities under ideal conditions. "I'll need detailed topographical information and current weather data to calculate proper firing solutions." "Already prepared," Major Wells replied, handing her a thick folder. "You'll have tonight to study the terrain and plan your positioning. The operation begins at 0500 hours. As the briefing continued, Sarah absorbed every detail of the complex operation. 3 companies would participate in a coordinated assault, with her providing overwatch from a concealed position nearly a kilometer from the target compound. The timing would be critical, as she would need to neutralize the elevated sentries within a very narrow window to allow the assault teams to advance safely. After the briefing, Sarah found herself walking back to the barracks with Lieutenant Watson and Sergeant Powell. The conversation was tense, but professional, focusing on the tactical requirements of the upcoming mission. "Martinez," Powell said as they approached the barracks, "I know we've had our differences, but tomorrow is bigger than any personality conflicts. I need to know you're going to be focused and disciplined out there." "I understand, Sergeant. I won't let the unit down." Powell studied her face for a moment. "I believe you mean that. But tomorrow isn't about individual performance. It's about being part of something larger than yourself. Can you handle that responsibility?" "Yes, Sergeant, I can." That evening, Sarah spent hours studying the operational materials, memorizing every detail of the target area, and calculating firing solutions for multiple scenarios. The terrain was challenging, with complex wind patterns created by the surrounding ravines and significant elevation differences that would affect bullet trajectory. Corporal Chin stopped by her bunk around 2,200 hours, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup on her footlocker. "Thanks," Sarah replied, grateful for the caffeine and the company. "Have you seen terrain like this before?" Chin looked at the topographical maps spread across her bunk. "Similar, in Iraq. The elevation changes are going to be your biggest challenge. A miscalculation of just a few inches could mean the difference between a clean hit and a complete miss." "I've been running the numbers," Sarah said, showing him her calculations. "Wind speed at the target will be approximately 10 to 15 miles per hour from the northwest, but the ravines are going to create unpredictable updrafts and downdrafts. What's your plan for dealing with that?" "I'll need to make a ranging shot before the operation begins, probably at first light when the wind patterns are most stable. Once I have a baseline for the atmospheric conditions, I can adjust for each subsequent target." Chin nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. What about your escape route after you complete the mission?" Sarah pointed to a ridge line approximately 500 meters from her planned firing position. "I'll displace to this secondary position after the first 3 shots, then move to this tertiary position for final overwatch during the extraction." "Good. Just remember that once you start shooting, everyone in that compound is going to be looking for you. Speed and accuracy are going to be equally important. As Chen left, Sarah continued studying until well past midnight, wanting to be as prepared as possible for what could be the most challenging mission of her career. She finally fell asleep with the maps spread around her bunk, her mind still calculating angles and wind corrections. The alarm went off at 0400 hours, giving her time for final equipment checks and a quick breakfast before the operation began. In the pre-dawn darkness, the base was alive with controlled activity as 3 companies prepared for their coordinated assault. Sarah's equipment loadout was specifically tailored for the long-range engagement. Her M24 sniper rifle was equipped with a high-magnification scope and loaded with match-grade ammunition. She carried additional rounds for different ranges and conditions, along with a spotting scope for detailed target observation. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was conducted in complete radio silence, with Sarah reviewing her target priorities one final time. The primary targets were 3 guard positions that commanded overlapping fields of fire across the approach route. Secondary targets included a communications position and any reinforcements that might appear during the assault. The landing zone was a small clearing approximately 2 kilometers from her firing position, requiring a careful approach through rocky terrain in complete darkness. Sarah moved slowly and deliberately, using night vision equipment to navigate while maintaining noise discipline. By 0445 hours, she was in position on a rocky outcrop that provided an excellent view of the target compound. Through her scope, she could see the guard positions exactly as described in the intelligence briefing. The sentries appeared relaxed and unsuspecting, unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Overwatch in position, she reported quietly into her radio. "I have clear lines of sight to all primary targets." "Roger, Overwatch," came Captain Sullivan's reply. "Stand by for initiation." Sarah settled into her shooting position and began making final adjustments to her scope settings. The wind was stronger than predicted, gusting between 15 and 20 miles per hour, which would require significant compensation at the extended ranges she was facing. At exactly 0500 hours, the operation began. "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage," Sullivan's voice crackled through her earpiece. Sarah's first target was the northernmost guard position, approximately 950 meters away. She adjusted her aim point for wind and elevation, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the guard collapse immediately, a clean hit. Her second target was already turning toward the sound of the first shot when Sarah's bullet found him. Another precise hit at nearly 1,000 meters. The third guard had taken cover and was scanning the surrounding terrain with binoculars, trying to locate the sniper. Sarah waited patiently for him to present a clear target, then fired. The shot struck him in the upper chest, dropping him instantly. 3 primary targets neutralized, she reported. Assault teams are clear to advance. But, as the ground teams began their movement, Sarah spotted something that hadn't been in the intelligence briefing. A 4th guard position on the eastern side of the compound, previously concealed by shadows, suddenly became visible as the rising sun changed the lighting conditions. "Contact east," she reported urgently. "Previously unidentified guard position, approximately 800 meters. He has eyes on second company's approach route." "Can you engage?" Sullivan asked. The shot would be technically challenging because the target was partially concealed behind a stone wall, with only his head and shoulders visible. At 800 meters with gusty winds, the margin for error was virtually non-existent. "Positive," Sarah replied. "Engaging now." She adjusted her aim point and fired. The shot was perfect, striking the guard in the head and eliminating the threat to second company. "Outstanding shooting, Overwatch," Sullivan's voice carried clear relief. "All assault teams continue advance." But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Through her spotting scope, she could see additional movement within the compound. Intelligence had significantly underestimated the number of defenders present, and reinforcements were beginning to appear at windows and doorways throughout the complex. "Multiple additional targets appearing throughout the compound," she reported. "Count is at least 8 additional hostiles, possibly more." "Can you support the assault teams?" Sullivan asked. Sarah was already shifting her aim to the most immediate threats. Her rifle cracked repeatedly as she engaged target after target, each shot carefully placed to maximum effect. Her position was becoming increasingly exposed as the defenders began to coordinate their search for her location. "Overwatch, you need to displace immediately," Watson's voice came through her earpiece. "We're seeing coordinated movement toward your position." Sarah packed her equipment quickly and began moving toward her predetermined secondary position. But, as she crossed an open stretch of ground, enemy fire began impacting around her. She had been spotted, and multiple shooters were now trying to eliminate her. A bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending stone fragments across her cheek. Another round hit her pack, destroying her spotting scope. She was taking accurate fire from at least 3 different positions, and her escape route was becoming increasingly dangerous. Overwatch is taking fire and displacing, she reported, her voice steady despite the incoming rounds, continuing to provide support as able. From her new position, Sarah could see that the assault teams were encountering heavier resistance than expected. Second Company was pinned down by accurate fire from the compound's main building, and Third Company was taking casualties as they attempted to breach the fortified entrance. Without hesitation, Sarah began engaging the targets that were causing the most problems for the ground teams. Her shots were hurried now, fired quickly between incoming rounds, but her accuracy remained exceptional. One by one, the defensive positions fell silent under her precise fire. The battle raged for another 20 minutes before the compound was finally secured. When the all-clear signal finally came, Sarah realized she had fired 37 rounds and achieved 34 confirmed hits, a success rate that bordered on the impossible under such difficult conditions. As she made her way to the extraction point, Sarah felt a profound sense of exhaustion mixed with accomplishment. She had proven herself once again, but she also realized that each success raised the stakes for future missions. Her reputation was becoming both an asset and a burden, creating expectations that might eventually be impossible to meet. The helicopter ride back to base was quiet, with soldiers from all 3 companies processing the intensity of the morning's engagement. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing that within hours there would be debriefings, after-action reports, and preparations for the next mission. What she didn't know was that Colonel Harrison had been monitoring the operation from division headquarters, and her performance had attracted attention at levels she couldn't have imagined. Her life was about to change in ways that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her role in the military. 6 months had passed since Sarah's first mission, and FOB Thunderbolt had become a different place. Her reputation had spread far beyond Charlie Company, and requests for her sniper support had become so frequent that division headquarters had begun tracking her mission statistics. But what no one knew was that Colonel Marcus Harrison had been quietly building a comprehensive file on her performance, waiting for the right moment to reveal the full scope of her impact on operations in their sector. The briefing room was unusually crowded for what had been announced as a routine company meeting. Not only were all of Charlie Company's soldiers present, but Sarah noticed officers and senior enlisted personnel from other units scattered throughout the room. The atmosphere felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't quite identify. Captain Sullivan stood at the front of the room with an expression that seemed to mix pride with amazement. Behind him, Colonel Harrison waited with a thick folder and what appeared to be several official documents. "Gentlemen and lady," Sullivan began, "we've been asked here today for what I initially thought was a standard operational briefing. But it turns out that Colonel Harrison has some information to share that's going to surprise all of us." Harrison stepped forward, his weathered face betraying no emotion. He was a career soldier with 28 years of experience, including multiple combat tours and a reputation for blunt honesty that had earned him respect throughout the division. "Over the past 6 months," Harrison began, his voice carrying easily through the silent room, "this company has participated in 43 combat operations. During that same period, enemy casualties in this sector have increased by 400%, while friendly casualties have decreased by 67%. A murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. These were impressive statistics by any measure, but Sarah couldn't understand why she was being asked to listen to what seemed like a routine operational review. "Those numbers represent saved American lives," Harrison continued. "They represent successful missions that might otherwise have failed. They represent tactical superiority that has fundamentally changed how we operate in this area of responsibility." Harrison opened his folder and consulted the top document. "During these 43 operations, one individual has been responsible for 237 confirmed enemy kills. These weren't spray engagements or lucky shots. These were precision eliminations of high-value targets under extremely challenging conditions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand where this was heading. Around the room, soldiers were turning to look at her with expressions of growing amazement. The average engagement range for these eliminations was 723 meters. Harrison continued relentlessly. The longest confirmed kill was at 1,140 meters, made under adverse weather conditions with a crosswind exceeding 25 miles per hour. Sergeant Powell, who was sitting 3 rows ahead of Sarah, turned around to stare at her with his mouth slightly open. His expression showed a mixture of shock and something that might have been embarrassment. These statistics become even more remarkable, Harrison said, when you consider that they were achieved by a soldier who had never seen combat before arriving at this forward operating base. A soldier who was initially assigned a radio watch because her squad leader didn't trust her with anything more challenging. The room erupted in whispered conversations as the full implications of Harrison's revelations began to sink in. Sarah felt her face burning with a combination of pride and acute embarrassment as dozens of eyes focused on her. Harrison raised his hand for silence. Specialist Sarah Martinez has not only proven herself to be an exceptional marksman, she has fundamentally changed how we conduct operations in this theater. Her precision fire support has enabled missions that would have been impossible with conventional assets, and her intelligence gathering has prevented multiple ambushes and casualties. Captain Sullivan stepped forward again. The colonel has some specific examples he'd like to share. Harrison consulted his notes and began reading from what was clearly a detailed operational log. Operation Mountain Strike, 6 weeks ago. Specialist Martinez identified and eliminated a sniper team that had been terrorizing convoy routes for 3 months. Her shot at 980 meters through a window opening measuring 18 inches by 12 inches not only eliminated the immediate threat, but recovered intelligence that led to the capture of an entire weapons cache. Sarah remembered that mission vividly. She had spent 4 hours in position, waiting for the enemy sniper to present himself for just a few seconds. The shot had indeed been through an incredibly small opening, requiring calculations that pushed her skills to the absolute limit. Operation Desert Thunder, 4 weeks ago, Harrison continued. Specialist Martinez provided overwatch for a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment. She eliminated 7 hostiles in 43 seconds, allowing the rescue team to extract 2 captured contractors without casualties. The room was completely silent now, with every soldier hanging on Harrison's words. Sarah could see the shock and amazement on faces throughout the briefing room, including several soldiers who had initially questioned her abilities. Operation Iron Wolf, 2 weeks ago. Specialist Martinez engaged a suicide bomber at 612 meters while he was moving through a crowded marketplace. Her precision shot eliminated the threat without harming any civilians, preventing what intelligence estimated would have been 30 to 40 civilian casualties. That mission had been Sarah's most challenging psychologically. She had watched through her scope as the bomber moved through crowds of innocent people, knowing that a missed shot could cause exactly the casualties she was trying to prevent. The pressure had been enormous, but her training had held. Harrison closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. Specialist Martinez, would you please stand up? Sarah rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room focused on her. She maintained military bearing, but inside she felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Harrison was revealing. These statistics, Harrison said, represent the most successful combat record by an individual soldier in this division's history. But, more importantly, they represent a fundamental shift in how we think about the role of women in combat operations. He turned to address the entire room. When Specialist Martinez arrived at this base, many of you questioned whether she belonged here. Some of you actively worked to undermine her confidence and limit her opportunities. Those attitudes nearly cost us one of our most valuable tactical assets. The silence in the room was profound and uncomfortable. Sarah could see several soldiers, including Sergeant Powell, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The purpose of this briefing, Harrison continued, is not to embarrass anyone or assign blame. It's to ensure that we learn from our mistakes and never again allow prejudice to interfere with military effectiveness. He gestured toward Sarah. This soldier has risked her life repeatedly to protect every person in this room. She has performed her duties with exceptional skill and unwavering courage. And she has done so while facing skepticism and hostility from the very people she was protecting. Harrison picked up an official document from the podium. Effective immediately, Specialist Martinez is being promoted to sergeant. She is also being awarded the Bronze Star with V Device for Valor, and she is being recommended for assignment to the Army's Special Operations Sniper School. The room exploded in applause, with soldiers throughout the briefing area rising to their feet. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as the magnitude of the moment hit her. This was recognition beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. But Harrison wasn't finished. "There's one more thing I want to share with you," he said, waiting for the applause to subside. 3 days ago, I received a call from the Pentagon. The Secretary of the Army has personally reviewed Sergeant Martinez's service record and combat performance. She is being considered for assignment to an elite counterterrorism unit that I'm not authorized to discuss in detail. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. The progression from dismissed recruit to special operations candidate seemed too rapid and dramatic to be real. Harrison turned to face her directly. "Sergeant Martinez, you have a choice to make. You can complete your current deployment with Charlie Company, where you have clearly found your place and proven your worth. Or you can accept reassignment to a unit that will challenge your skills in ways you probably can't imagine." Sarah stood silent for a moment, processing the overwhelming nature of the decision she was being asked to make. 6 months ago, she had arrived at FOB Thunderbolt desperate to prove herself worthy of serving alongside these soldiers. Now she was being offered opportunities that most soldiers could only dream of. "Sir," she said finally, "I'm honored by the recognition and the opportunities you're describing. But I need to know that my current unit will be properly supported if I accept reassignment." Harrison smiled for the first time during the briefing. "Sergeant Martinez, Charlie Company is receiving 2 additional designated marksmen next week, both trained to the same standards you've achieved. Your tactical innovations and procedures are being incorporated into division-wide training protocols." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her fellow soldiers. These men had become her brothers, despite the rocky beginning to their relationship. Leaving them felt like abandoning family. Sergeant Powell stood up from his seat and faced her. "Martinez," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "6 months ago, I thought you were going to get people killed. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about a lot of other things too." He paused, clearly struggling with emotions that were difficult for him to express publicly. "You've saved my life at least 3 times that I know of, and probably more that I don't. If the Army wants to give you bigger challenges and more responsibility, then you should take them. You've earned whatever opportunities they want to offer you." One by one, other soldiers began standing and nodding their agreement. Torres, Johnson, Chun, Watson, all of them showing their support for whatever decision she would make. Sarah felt the weight of their respect and acceptance, something she had worked so hard to achieve. But she also felt the pull of new challenges and the opportunity to serve at an even higher level. "Sir," she said to Colonel Harrison, "I accept the reassignment. But I want to request one condition." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "What condition, Sergeant?" "I want to finish my current deployment with Charlie Company. These soldiers have become my family, and I don't want to leave them while they're still in harm's way." Harrison nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. Your new assignment will begin when Charlie Company rotates back to the United States in 6 weeks." As the briefing concluded and soldiers began filing out of the room, Sarah found herself surrounded by her squad mates and fellow soldiers. The atmosphere was celebratory, but also tinged with the sadness that comes with impending separation. Sergeant Powell approached her as the crowd thinned. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. A big one." "No, Sergeant, you don't," Sarah replied. "You were doing your job as you understood it. We all learned something from this experience." Powell shook his head. "I almost destroyed the career of the best soldier I've ever served with. That's not something I'm going to forget or excuse easily." Sarah extended her hand to him. "Then, let's make sure it doesn't happen to the next soldier who doesn't fit the expected mold." As Powell shook her hand, Sarah realized that her journey at FOB Thunderbolt had come full circle. She had arrived as an outsider trying to prove her worth, and she was leaving as a proven warrior with the respect of every soldier who had served beside her. But more than that, she had changed the conversation about women in combat roles. Her example would open doors for other women and challenge assumptions that had limited military effectiveness for too long. That evening, Sarah sat on the steps of the barracks, watching the sun set over the Afghan mountains. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself to feel satisfied with what she had accomplished. Colonel Harrison had been right about one thing. She had fundamentally changed how operations were conducted in their sector. But the real change had been in the minds and attitudes of the soldiers around her, and that transformation would outlast any individual mission or deployment. As the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Sarah Martinez, newly promoted sergeant and Bronze Star recipient, smiled quietly to herself. They had said she couldn't handle combat. They had been wrong about everything.